Hello. Welcome to this special leap year edition of Why Not Both? My name is Pam Schaefer, and I'm a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I'm your host. Why Not Both is all about how our multiple passions inform our identity. This season, we're brought to you by Under the Radar magazine and produced by Laura Studeris. Please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode, including these special editions. And you can also come and hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB, the podcast, and we are on Instagram and on Twitter. For this special episode, we're really excited to celebrate the release of Solstice, which is the album by Grammy-nominated producer and writer Rob Graves. This interview was very zesty. We covered a lot of really interesting topics about creativity and writing, given that Rob also casually has his MFA in creative writing. I really hope that you enjoy this episode. So welcome to Why Not Both? We're here with
Yes.
Rob Graves.
Thank you for having me.
I'm laughing because we already talked about really rad stuff, but you don't know that yet.
All right, so we're started now. Okay, now I know.
Yeah, this is the start. Little do people
Great.
know there was a really good lead up to this.
Yeah,
But I would ask you to tell everyone what it is that you do and if there's a better question that someone could ask you than that.
sure. I'm a songwriter and record producer. I work mostly in the rock genres. Work with bands like Starset and Red, All That Remains, kind of heavier stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, I've sort of branched out a bit into some solo release stuff. I'm going to release a compilation of piano compositions called Solstice that comes out February 28th. So I'm branching out into that a bit, and I just do a lot of thinking and writing about creativity in general. And I'm also a bit of a fiction writer, and I'm really interested in how those two kind of interface, those two areas of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a broad scope of, I guess, what I do. And it's funny, to be here being interviewed. What I want to be asked, generally nothing. I don't want people to ask me anything. It's true. I kind of I'd rather they like maybe look at what I'm doing and learn from that, I guess. Maybe the answers are
Oh,
there, but it's a bit that's a bit of a lofty expectation to put on people. But yeah, in general, when I get asked questions, I'm like, don't you see already what I because I think creative people, like, we don't often know how we do what we do, which is a
right,
big part of it. And when you try to figure it out too much, you can get into trouble. So
right.
yeah, I encourage people to everyone wants a prescription, they want to know, how do you do this? How do you do that? And it's like, ugh, it's not the right direction to be asking questions. I think I would encourage people to more find their own way, so I tend to
Mhm.
answer a lot of questions with questions, I think maybe.
So Socratic method.
Yeah, I think that's the best way. People figure it out for themselves. They already know the answer. They don't know that they know it.
Ah, yeah, because you, for the audience, we had been talking about the Twitter threads that you post, and I was curious, like, what do you usually post in that threads, and is it responses to people's questions, or is it things that occur to you about creativity?
It's a great question. I and again, I don't often know. I just sort of get an idea uh, for something that usually I'm dealing with in something I'm making, and I have a thought about it, and I think, oh, this would maybe help other people if they knew this. And then I'll write like a long 30 or 40 sometimes tweet thread. I kind of go on them, but I try to be pretty direct. I'm not super like kid glove with things. I'm pretty direct about it. I think the people who are ready to hear whatever I would have to say are probably also at a place where I don't need to sugarcoat things,
Mhm.
I think. But I also have a bit of a thing with most creativity teaching. I think it's sort of become productivity teaching. It's not really the same thing.
Mm.
It's all about, finding time to sit down and do all these, I don't know. It's like, I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. It's process to me is a much more kind of visceral thing
Mhm.
where you have to really get in there and get your hands dirty. And most people who are teaching about creativity, I think there's very few of them. I don't know. I think creativity teaching should be done by people who are actually successfully creating things.
Mhm.
And there's a good example is Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm. That sprang to mind.
yeah, it's one of like the few books that is written by this is a guy who writes novels that are great, and he's talking about the process and how you do it and what you're going to run into as a creator.
Mhm.
Most other books you find on creativity, they're maybe written by an editor or somebody who just teaches uh, creativity. So it's a bit like, if you just smash a watch against the ground, break it apart, see all the pieces, it doesn't tell you anything about how to put the watch together. And
Right.
that's what we kind of want to know. They're breaking it down after the fact, like looking at successful novels and or songs, whatever, and how they happened, but it doesn't tell you anything about how to actually do it.
How to actually do
And
it,
there's
yeah.
this whole other like series of like awful things that can happen to you while you're creating that you'll never see in most creativity books. All the
Right.
self-doubt you have, all the lies you tell yourself, and all the fear you run into and all that kind of stuff. That's the real stuff. And
Right.
that's the kind of stuff I try to write about. Like as a working professional, what do I run into,
Mm.
for problems? And yeah, I guess I try to temper it with a little bit of, you know, maybe like Zen sort of philosophy, just sort of like get people to stop thinking a bit
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
just kind of trust in their process. So, but
What
yeah, ultimately, I
inspired
don't know why
you?
I write them.
Yeah, that was actually what I was wondering. See, you
I don't
anticipated
know
the
why.
question there.
I, I and I think that's the best thing. Like if I'm going after it with this attempt to like try to sort of do something, that's when you sort of start to fail. I, I like the things that I don't know why I do them. I just do
Mhm.
them, and that's really the kind of the point, of all of it. So
Well, and it seems like you wanna at least help other people, which, like, you wouldn't be sharing it outwardly if you didn't want to help other people who are in this process.
I think I do. It's funny because I don't really have that specific. This is going to sound bad, but I'm going to be honest. I don't really have that specific drive. I don't think I'm just going to help everybody create better. I don't. I'm glad that I do, and that happens. It seems like that's happening. I get great responses often on Twitter, and I'm very happy to see them. But it's not really like a impetus to do it. I remember getting, I get sometimes the songs that I write, people will send me a message about how it like changed their life and it helped them, and maybe they'll send me like a picture of like a tattoo of my lyrics and
Mhm.
on their body. It's awesome. It's cool, but it has nothing to do with why I do it. Like that doesn't even remotely enter the. I don't write an inspiring song to think like I hope that changes somebody's life. Not
This
even a
gets
little
that
bit.
through to
It's
someone.
I just do it. Like that's the kind of the purest I think reason we can ever create is because you're just doing it for yourself. You would do this if you were the last person on earth. No one
Mhm.
was ever going to hear it. You would still do it anyway. And that's how you, I think, I don't want to call it a calling. I don't like that whole perspective, but I don't know. Those are the things that are sort of, kind of the truest, most genuine things where you do it only kind of for yourself because you have to do it. And hopefully people like it.
Yeah, that's why I'm curious how it ended up, like, on Twitter, because you could be puzzling those things out for yourself as well, like, it sounds incredibly fulfilling for you, and I was like, "How did those end up then on the internet instead of, like, in a journal?" Because I was like, "Those could end up there too."
That's a good That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I do write about it a lot. I kind of write it out. I don't really journal. I'm not for people that do. That's great. I'm just not like that. My head doesn't work that way. I
Mhm.
kind of always wanted to be. I wish that I was that kind of person. And I've even tried a few times, but I'm just not that. This doesn't work that way.
Right.
Whenever something occurs to me, I will often write it out. It's many authors are attributed to having said, "I don't know what I think until I write it." I
Mhm.
don't know who
Mhm.
actually did say it, but, that is so true. I mean, it's funny how I'm writing something out, and I'm like, "I didn't know that's exactly what I thought," and it's a whole new idea,
Mhm.
that appears right there, so that's why I say people, you know the answer already. People asking questions, there's just a lack of it's about introspection, it's about asking yourself
Ah.
questions like, "What's holding me back from this or that, and why?" Yeah, one big one that nobody asks themselves is about discipline. Like I get this question a lot with music. where they say, how do you discipline yourself to sit down and write? And that's the kind of question where when I say I don't want to be asked questions because like I
Mhm.
can't answer that. I'm like, the whole premise of the question is wrong. It's if you have to discipline yourself, your time would be so much better spent asking and investigating into your own psyche why you have to discipline yourself to do something, why
Right.
you want to discipline yourself at all, instead of just what would you do naturally without disciplining yourself.
Yeah, because then it's
And
the meta question of like, well, then why do you need discipline to do something that you'd be motivated to do anyway?
yeah, there's a bigger problem going on if you can't make yourself sit down to write. There's something bigger going on. It's not that you don't want to be a writer. It's not that you should quit. I don't believe that, but there's something else going on that's making you have to sit down to write, because
Mhm.
you should love to do that. You should want to do that. You should do that. For start by asking yourself, if I knew that nobody was ever going to read this thing I'm writing, or no one's ever going to hear this song that I'm writing, would I still
Mhm.
do it? And if the answer is no,
Mm.
you have to be very honest with yourself. The answer is no, then you keep digging, you keep asking questions. People just don't do that. That's why I want creators to maybe dig into themselves. It's about brutal self-honesty,
Right.
and if you can do that, you can do anything. You can you can really find your way to any sort of through any problem, I
And do you
think.
find that that kind of introspection is lacking in some of the education that people are receiving, both in the fields that you're in, like in music as well as creative writing?
It is, yeah, among amateurs, and I use the word amateur, and I use the words amateur and professional, like Stephen Pressfield does in his book that I mentioned,
Mhm,
War
mhm.
of Art. He has nothing to do with how we would use the word colloquially, whether professional makes money doing it, amateur doesn't. It doesn't really mean that. You can have amateur professionals and professional amateurs. It's about your habits. You have amateur habits
Mhm,
or professional habits. Um, so yeah, I find that the the amateur really doesn't ask those kind of questions, and they're not being taught. I guess that was your question.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so I have an MFA in creative writing from University of Maine,
mhm,
and you know, I would say that I, like the only thing I learned about this kind of stuff I'm talking about is by watching the faculty, the professional writers
mhm.
who were there. It bridges a bit into my, the why not both
Yes.
aspect, or at least one of the many ones I probably have.
The multiverse of why not both?
Yeah, I think as a writer of fiction, I definitely had some amateur habits, because I tend to compare the music stuff and the writing stuff probably too much. Like I try to think
Mm,
like how are they different when I sit down to write versus sit down to play piano or guitar or something.
got it.
And I found that they were different, and through a lot of introspection and asking these kind of questions, I realized like I definitely had created all these blocks and had a lot of amateur habits with fiction writing. I would tend to ask the faculty certain kinds of questions that would annoy the hell out of me if I could ask them about music.
Oh,
Stuff
interesting.
like the discipline. Maybe that's a good example. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, people would ask me that about music. I'm like, you just do it. Like, I'm always doing it. I'm doing it now. I'm writing a song in my head. Like, always, there's always stuff happening. Like, you just do it. Uh, but with fiction writing, I'm like, well, what's the best time? How many words should I get a day? And should I plot or outline first? And all these kind of things that are like, dude, come on, that's it's a joke. If I get asked that, about music, do I write lyrics? This is the big one I always get asked. Do you write music or lyrics first? And it's like, oh my god, I don't know. I write whatever comes
All
to
right.
write. I just write it. I don't think about that shit. If you're thinking about that shit, you're asking all the wrong questions. Like you got to reframe the whole thing. Like you're not even on the map.
I mean, what
So
helped you get out of that frame of mind? Because that sounds almost like when people are focused on the content of something as opposed to like the surface content as opposed to the emotional content or the meaning of something or really kind of the underlying structure. And how do you get people into that place where they are actually focused more on the deeper structures? Like what do you write about and kind of what helped you get into that?
yeah, well, the way you ended that question was good, because I was about to say I don't get them there at all. Other people, I don't. like the things I say are just the things that are I think that they're true. They're the things that I see, and it's not it's not a thing where people have to do it or not have to do it. They can
Mhm,
choose whatever they want. If they want maybe to get over some of the stuff that's causing them problems, they can do
mhm,
this. But yeah, I don't I guess set it with the goal to lead people anywhere. But when you asked about how I did it myself, I
mhm,
don't know. It's a lot of I do an immense amount of I guess reading, and I try to incorporate a lot of different mediums,
mhm.
photography and art. They all feed each other. They all inspire each other. And I think just because casting that sort of wide net, I don't know, you get exposed to new things and new ways of thinking. And I think really it just like people are never going to overcome those kind of things until they get to a point where they have to almost like it the, the alternative becomes almost unbearable in a way. Like
Mhm.
when you get too frustrated with something you're creating and you realize you're thinking about it all the time, but in the wrong way. And
Mm,
instead of writing it, you're just thinking about it and
mhm.
talking about it and doing all these. And eventually that people can do that for years, but not until it becomes just unbearable and they have to get it out of them somehow.
Right.
Will they start to look somewhere for the answers? And like I've been doing this like 20 years. I feel like only in the last year or two, I've really started to have any semblance of understanding of what like is really going on in this whole process.
Well, and also
So
in some ways
it's funny.
because you produce other people's music as well, like, do you find that then you're kind of, in a way, eliciting this from other people so that you can help them craft their art?
Yeah, I guess I don't think of it in those terms, but it is it is certainly that. I go into like when I'm producing somebody else's music. Well, I should say too, like as a producer, for me personally, there's sort of different sorts of producers. There's guys who are kind of hands off. They kind of sit back and
Mhm,
they not that they aren't good at what they do or contributing a lot, but they're contributing in a different way, like an overall management, like they're putting other people together and they're
mhm,
looking at the result and steering it. Then I'm much more of a hands-on kind of producer, and I get in there and I'm working on the stuff. I tend to play a lot of the instruments on the tracks I do,
mhm,
and I really get in there. And I often tend to write a lot of what I produce, and I also kind of influence the sound. People come to me for like kind of a specific sound. I sort of do like
right,
big cinematic sounding rock. So because of that, I tend to have a lot of influence on the overall sound, even if it's a song I didn't write.
mhm.
Uh, so it often feels like my thing anyway, even though it's like a different artist. It's kind of I probably shouldn't be like admitting this on a podcast, but I think it's I mean it's funny because I think the artists that hire me they know that, and that's kind of why they're hiring me
Right,
probably is they want that thing. You know, not everybody does. Some artists are really developed, and you just need to stay out of the way. And other times, bands will come to you and be like, "I need you to like." We need to craft a sound. That's a whole new thing. So it often feels like my art anyway. It has to, because otherwise it's just a job. I mean, I could
right,
get a job somewhere if all I'm going to do is show up and move
push buttons.
faders and dials and press buttons and
Yeah.
just make somebody's stuff sound good. Like I have no interest in that. I'd rather be like a doctor or something than I would, it's just a job at that, or a chef. I'd become a chef or I don't know. I'm not fit for too many things. Maybe like lighthouse keeper is probably my best
You'd be a lighthouse keeper.
option.
I don't
Yeah.
know
I'm like
why that
super
delighted me
introverted.
so much. Yeah, because when you said,
Yeah.
like, "Don't ask me questions," I just imagined you with, like, a giant beard in a lighthouse just being like, "Mm, yes,
You're not far off.
captain."
I live way out in the woods in Maine, and I do have a beard. Yeah, I that's the other things I left. I left Nashville. I lived in Nashville for like 12 or 15 years,
Mhm,
and yeah, so people see me up here in Maine. I'm from Maine originally, so I came back,
mhm,
and
mhm.
they think, oh, you can be a professional musician and not have to live in Nashville or LA or New York, and it's like, well, don't be misled by that. It's I lived there for 12 or 15 years, and I that's why I can I still have to travel a lot, but like if you're
Right,
starting out, it's not going to be easy to start from Maine, honestly. If you're
I
trying to,
think that that's definitely important for people to know because there is like the economic aspect of this podcast. I do talk to people about like, well, why do you do the multiple things you do, and like how has like income impacted what you've chosen to do? And that's very true. Where it's like
yeah,
people are like, oh, well, I see these artists that don't live in a major city and they save so much money. How do they do that? And it's like, well, they probably spent at least a decade living in a major city.
oh yeah,
Like,
yeah. It's very 100% true. You just don't start. Very rare that you could start outside of a major center for the thing that you're trying to do. It's
right.
maybe a little bit easier nowadays with how things are connected, but uh, yeah, it wasn't until I had enough financial stability and a lot of royalties coming in and stuff that I could. It basically didn't matter if I ever worked again. Like by the time I moved,
Mhm.
So I thought if people still hire me and they want to come up here to work in my studio in Maine, that's great. If they don't, I can go to them or not. Everything will be okay. Everything's going to be fine.
That was
I just had
actually
to get out of it. It was killing me.
oh,
Need
I
some
feel bad.
space.
I'm an LA native and I'm still here and I'm just like, what's that like going back home to Maine? Because I'm just like, when I go back
Mm.
home, it's like to Tarzana.
Yeah, I don't live in my exact hometown. When I do go up there, it is a different. I love it though. I love where I'm from, and I'm from like northern Maine, like so far up. It's probably not believable to most people how rural like parts of Maine are. Uh, it's like one of the few places in the country you can really get lost in the woods, and never come out. It's very
Wow.
rural, but I live more down in the south near the coast, and yeah, it's very grounding for me. I think when you when your whole world is just music, 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 and you're in the industry, and everybody else is in the industry, it's so stale so fast because everything's just on this feedback loop. Like
Mhm.
you're consuming the things that you're putting out, so it just turns into, I think, garbage. Like I need external inspiration and output. I got to work at it from the outside of it. I
Mm,
guess that
got it.
it was different career trajectory because of that. I think I could have been a lot busier than I am. I could do a lot more records than I do, but it's about, I mean, I don't say happiness, but I don't know, it's about contentment is a better word. It's what
Mm.
you really makes you content. And I didn't, you spend so much time trying to get more and more and more. And then you realize like, that's not even close to what it's about. You just want to,
It sounds like it changed your workflow and changed what you chose to work on moving back.
it, it really did. Yeah. It affected a lot of things. It enabled me to like do some more schooling,
Mhm.
which I love school.
Yay.
Yeah, it enabled that, but I don't know. I think it led to more of a peace of mind that it allowed me to have the peace to start, I guess, a luxury to start asking some of the questions that I was able to ask myself about creating. And
Mhm.
I probably wouldn't have been able to do that if I had stayed in Nashville. I was too busy, and now I'm up here, and I have a lot of time. I still work a lot when I'm producing a record, but I try to produce more than like one record a year, like one and a half
Mhm.
records a year, uh, and not including my own stuff. And
Right.
I'm on a pretty good like rotating schedule. The two of the bigger bands I produce are one's called Red and the other is called Starset,
Mhm.
and they're on pretty good alternating schedules. So like I'll do a Red album and then have several months off, and then I'll do a Starset record and have several months off, and we kind of go back and forth. So
And how do you
um,
balance that with your own work as well as your own writing? Because are you producing work in both music and writing, or like what does your workflow even look like?
yeah. I am doing a lot of writing these days, and I tend to do that. Like when it's hard for me to do both at the same time.
Mm.
I would say I'm not sure why it should be that way, but I find when I'm very busy on a record, I always think I'm like, oh, I'm just going to keep knocking out about 500 words a day in my novel or something, but it never seems to work that well. I always tend to get, because what happens is like I get very consumed by one or the other. Like I'm kind of that sort of, when I talk about not needing to be disciplined, that's kind of what it is. I sort of allow myself to become consumed by the thing I'm working on.
Ah,
So it's hard for me to. split into that kind of fire for two things
Right.
at the same time. Other people don't maybe have that problem, but I don't know. I don't like to divide my attention too much.
Got
I
it.
usually do okay when I start. Like I'll start a record and I'm still writing a bunch, but then all of a sudden there's something clicks with that record and it's like all I'm working on. It's all I can think about. It's around the clock, and and then I get back to like writing stories or a
And
novel or
that's
something after that.
what you said almost seems like the antidote to when people are worried about discipline. It's letting yourself be consumed by something. I was like, oh, that's really beautiful. Like to
I
allow
think
that to
so.
happen.
Yeah, it's I I like how you're phrasing it too, as allowing it to happen. It's yeah, I like that perspective. People don't really most creators they yeah, they wouldn't they want other things more than they want to create. And that's the thing they don't realize. And that's what you can realize by asking yourself these questions. Like about why do I need to be disciplined? It's because there's something you want more
Right.
than you actually want to write. It can be often, it's usually focusing on an outcome too much. You want your novel to be super successful. You want to get a big publishing deal out of it. You want everybody to love it. You're invested into an outcome, and it's pretty paralyzing. Maybe you want the money, maybe you want the lifestyle of being a writer. It's super glamorous. Yeah, it's
I was
really
literally, I was like,
it's, yeah,
holding back a laugh. I was like, ah, yes. I love that people think that being a musician or a writer is so glamorous. It's like, it's mainly sitting about in your hoodie and troubleshooting things and pondering and
it's a
drinking
very lonely.
tea and
Yes, it's a very lonely life, because what happens is they only see, like, they see pictures I put on Twitter or Instagram. I'm like, here I am, like, backstage with Breaking Benjamin, or here I am, you know, traveling somewhere to take a writing trip, whatever. That stuff's
Mhm.
great, but like that's you're seeing the highlights. It's
Yes.
punctuated
Yes.
with the highlights. It's in reality, you're getting up and it's lonely. Like you're sitting in a little desk probably, and the light on, and you're just pounding out stuff and kind of wrestling with ideas and bleeding out, tears over it. Sometimes it's not. I know it probably sounds enticing to. I'm romanticizing it more than it really is. Even that, trying to not romanticize it makes it sound better than it is. It's not. Um,
I was like,
yeah, it's just
usually for me, it involves an oversized hoodie, pamplemousse LaCroix, and pacing
yeah,
around my house,
yeah,
thinking
a lot of
about,
pacing.
yeah, there's a lot of movement. And then I come back to my desk and then I make sounds and then I drink more LaCroix and maybe hiccup a bit and then walk around a little and then come on back.
Yeah,
If someone was actually watching a reality show of me creating a song, they're like, really? That's what did that? I'm like, oh, yeah.
yeah. I always thought there should be like a Project Runway style show about like songwriters.
Yeah.
Trying to like how we actually create. It's funny. That actually was kind of the impetus of why I did this new solo project thing. It was really about exploring that, like, how do you create, like, how does it happen?
Mhm.
Even after 20 years, I guess I wanted to think about it more. I think the MFA, that was kind of recent, so it really got me thinking about, like, as I said, the difference of the two things in creativity, and why does one feel different than the other thing and all that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So to explore it more, I just wanted to kind of say, well, this is how it started. It was every Saturday I'm gonna, and I decided this like on a Saturday morning. Like I just kind of woke up and decided I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna
Mhm.
write a song. I'm gonna kind of improvise it. I'm gonna make it up as I go, and then fine tune it a bit, and then I'm gonna just put it on YouTube.
Oh,
And I'm gonna
nice.
and it kind of, the idea just kind of happened like pretty quick. Like I'm doing it, and every week I'm gonna do this for like 10 songs every Saturday, and I'm not gonna think about it at all during the week. I'm just gonna, like,
Mhm.
Saturday morning, get up, and that's what I do that day.
Amazing.
And whatever happens is gonna happen. It's gonna get posted. And there's a lot of kind of challenging, aspects to that. I kind of thought, like, can I really do that? Like, can I really accept that, like, I'm just gonna, you know, write something and improvise it almost, and it's
Mhm.
maybe it won't be good. I don't know. Will people like it? It's gonna be pretty quick. It's whatever happens, happens, and you really have to be in a to write something that quickly. You have to like I always talk my a lot of my threads. I always talk about not thinking
Mhm.
and um, just letting really shutting that part of your brain off, not judging your work, not thinking about it at all, just doing it and letting it come through you. And I think that, that's when the work is really you. It's kind of
Mhm.
a bit of a dichotomy. Maybe it's a paradox that the more of yourself you try to put into the work, the less it's really going to be you.
Well, it's
It's you have
using
to
kind
sort of
of
shut that off.
the different parts of your mind. Like there's I don't know. I don't know if your if your publicist told you I'm also a therapist. That's my other job.
Oh, okay. So you're analyzing everything I'm saying right now.
It reminded me of uh, basically studying neuropsychiatry, and the front of our brains is it's the newest part of our brains, and it's the analytical part, like the prefrontal cortex, really. And I'm dramatically simplifying this, so any
Hmm.
neuropsychiatrists out there, I'm so sorry. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's the front of our brains. It's like, oh, logic and critical thinking and all of those things, and all of those things are really really useful for not writing a song.
Yeah.
Like, the useful part of your brain for writing a song is, like, the middle of your brain, and that's the older part, but that's the part that stores, like, emotional memories and images and language and things like that, and that's kind of like the deeper nonverbal portion of your brain, and that's the
Yeah.
part that, like, is really, really, really important to access for writing, but if you have them competing with each other, it's kinda like pressing, like, the gas and the brakes at the same time, like, you're not gonna end up with something that
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. 100%. I think it's I've over the years I've definitely fallen into that trap of thinking about trying to do a specific thing and trying to like go after a specific thing instead of just turning that off and letting it be what it is, and then that's just all it's going to be. Which that was kind of the point of trying to do this with these songs. I just want to see if I could really do that because I talk a lot of stuff on Twitter about it. I wanted to see like could I really do this? Like could I want to put it on my shoulders and say here we go. I'm going to just
You're gonna do it.
show up and do this. I had no plan for it. But it turned out that it was somewhat well received, and it's gonna so now I'm gonna release it as a record. The first series is called Solstice. I'll release it as it's actually a 16 song record. I did
Mhm.
10 songs, but for the release I did more. I did 3 new songs that are unreleased, and I also took 3 of the originals and I put live strings on them. They're kind of orchestral versions
Mhm.
with the piano. And then I've done, since that time I did another series of 10 songs, and I've actually just started my third series of it. So I learned so much while I was doing it. Like I saw how I was letting thinking enter the process. And,
Mhm.
uh, it was it's kind of funny thing. I'm planning on doing a thread about this actually today. The second series I did is called Embers. And as I was doing that series, I was really into the flow and I was not thinking about it. I was just every Saturday just pounding them out and doing it.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't think they were that good. Like, I wasn't thinking about it that much, but I thought, like, these are so quick and I'm just doing them and I'm putting them out there and are they even any good? Like, I wasn't sure. Like, I kind of thought, like, maybe they're not that great. And I didn't really go back and listen to them much. And it wasn't until like just a month or two ago, and, the whole series had been out for a while. And I went back and listened to them all again. And it was some of my favorite things I've ever written. I didn't remember them at all.
Oh.
It was funny, I didn't even remember writing them. I'd be hearing the song and like, "Oh my god, it went there? Holy how did I even" and then that went immediately into like, this is actually crazy, and I mean that in like a real way. It's insane that I thought, "Well, I'm about to start a new series. I don't know if I can live up to this." And if you look at all the dumb things in that, it's like, first of all, while I was doing them, I didn't like them that much, and it
Uh-huh.
turns out they're some of my favorite things I've ever done.
Uh-huh.
So it just shows the lie we tell ourselves while we're creating, if you let yourself think about it. And then I started to worry I could live up to the guy who wrote those, and it's me. Like I wrote those. So why would I? It just shows all the lies we say. Like, am I good enough to do this thing? I'm actually comparing myself to myself.
Yep.
It, and of course, that's ludicrous. So it should show you that if you're having those feelings as a creator, they're lies. It's just something you're brain. I like to say reptile brain. You've studied neuropsychology, so you probably cringe at that term, but it's the thing that tells you like, don't go in that cave, it might be dangerous. And
Yep.
then nowadays it's don't change, it might be dangerous. Don't succeed, don't get in shape, don't
Yep.
get a
Yep.
new job, it might be dangerous. And you listen to it, you believe it, and you know, you have to shut it off. It's
I was gonna say, it
I don't
sounds
know.
like what you did was
Still
practice
learning.
like visceral acceptance because you can tell someone that you have to shut it off. But you're right, and it's funny because it doesn't make me cringe. You said reptile brain; it's totally
I
fine.
know. Yeah,
That's
I
like
know it's not like a real,
yeah,
I know it's so much more.
it's so funny. But yeah, that's the base of your brain. That's basically like there to keep you alive and controls like
Yeah.
all your fun autonomic functions. But like it's there to keep you out of danger, which is great. And in a way, so is your middle portion of your brain because that's the part of your brain also that's still trying to keep you safe because any change is perceived as a potential
Yeah.
threat, whether that change is good or bad.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, it's different, so therefore it might be dangerous, therefore don't do it. But you challenged yourself to do that. That's it. That's why like came to my mind like visceral acceptance that like you had to accept and do what you were doing without kind of looking back. And that's so cool that then when you actually listen to it, you're like, oh, who was that guy? That guy's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it was that experience. I didn't even remember him. I think uh, to just capitalize on what you just said there, I think what happens if you can let yourself go there, you can actually start using those things, the need to stay safe, the need to not be dangerous. It's actually a great compass for your work. You can, make those things work for you now. So if the work you're doing feels dangerous, if it doesn't feel safe, then that's great because that's what you
Yes.
want to do. You don't ever want to be doing safe music. And if you're doing like safe, if it doesn't feel dangerous, if it doesn't feel scary, it's probably not going to do that great, to be honest. It's not going to revolutionize anything. It's not going to, you need to exist in that place where it feels a little bit reckless, a little bit like,
Mhm.
can I really do this? Is this okay to do? Like, it should feel that way. And if it, you can actually use those parts of your brain to like steer you in the right direction.
Right.
Because when it says don't do this, you go, oh, okay, I need to do that. Like, it's a
Yes.
very,
Yes.
yeah,
That's
you
so
can,
funny. Yeah.
it's a bit of vengeance almost on it because you think all the years this voice held me back. So you're getting it back almost by saying, I'm going to use
Right?
you now.
You're like,
So
"I'm gonna use you for my own good." Because yeah,
yeah,
that voice, I mean, some of it is very useful that our brain kind of schematizes things so that we understand them.
sure.
Like, it would be really confusing if every time we encountered a couch, we had to figure out what it was, but the fact that our brain is like, "This is a couch. This is what you do with couches. You put your bottom on them." It's
Yeah.
very useful. But when our brain encounters something new, it's like, "Excuse me, this is not a couch. Stay away from that."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, no, I'm gonna dive onto it."
Yeah. Yep.
Watch
There are
out,
certain
Shays
times.
Lounge, I'm coming for you.
Yes, the Chase Lounge.
No, I liked what you were saying about like just playing something and not listening back to it because it sounds like in a way also what you are working on now is a radical departure from what you were working on before sonically.
Well, yeah, it is and it isn't. It's yeah, on one level, of course, it's solo piano, like ambient soundscape music as compared to like huge metal with like screaming and, very aggressive rock. But um I kind of do this thing with productions. Again, when I say like people that come to me for a specific reason, it's because I'm really into like combining genres.
Mhm.
And with Red, for example, when I started working with them, I think it's just kind of the stuff I'm drawn to sonically. The music we were writing, I heard like it needed strings on it. Like I just felt like big
Mhm.
epic strings, and I just like to. I think back, with classical music when they, didn't have, I think of guys like, for example, like Paganini is a good example. Like his stuff was, they thought he was the devil.
Right.
They thought he was possessed because of a few reasons. First of all, only he could play the stuff he was writing on violin. He was so
Right.
good at it.
Right.
And also, he used a lot of uh, note choices that were considered evil by the church,
And he
tritones and
just
things
used
like that.
tritones. I'm just like, oh,
Yeah,
Paganini.
yeah. So he must be possessed, but that was the heavy metal of his day. That
Yeah.
was the edgy metal. So this kind of it's an atmosphere, it's a feeling. It's like an aggressive feeling, and whether it's classical music or whether it's on a piano or whether it's a band playing a huge riff, like it's the same spirit
Mhm.
almost. It's like so I thought like how did the classical guys do? Like the major tool they had was dynamics,
Mhm.
and that's something missing in a lot of modern rock, especially. So I kind of incorporated all those other elements. Like we have a lot of sections that are just these beautiful kind of moving string moments, and
Mhm.
then it enters with like something really heavy. It's also about contrast, because how do you make something loud and heavy? You put something quiet before it.
Yes. Yes.
It's like a lost art, I think, these days. So I tend to, in all the stuff I produce, I like to put those kind of elements into it that are sort of this new piano music I'm doing. It's almost like if you distilled that element from the metal I produce, that's kind of what this is. The new stuff. It's just what I've always done. I've maybe just done it in a different way. If you could just solo the strings of the piano from a metal
Mhm.
song, it would kind of sound like the new stuff that I'm releasing now. So
That's a really
it is very
interesting way to
different,
think
but
about
kind
it.
of yeah. It's I guess I only think about that because I'm asked. It's not. I don't really approach it that way.
Right, you're not, like, sitting there being like,
But
"Yes, I shall play the piano as though I were playing the solo from a metal
of
song."
course, yeah, yeah. But
I like
it's something you realize, and that's the best thing, I guess, is like after you do it, you realize what you did instead
right,
of it's like a top down instead of the other like more teleological thing where you're
right.
trying to do something. So
Yes. I think this is the only podcast where we can throw around teleological and me thinking to myself, "Well, it's the pianoforte, so it is a study in contrast, but it's the perfect instrument to do that with."
yes, exactly that. I'm glad you have that listener base that you know
Yeah.
you can get into this stuff, because yeah, it's not stuff that everybody is thinking about, even creators. But I think everybody is creative, as people just don't think of it in those terms, like what they things that they do in their life every day. It doesn't matter what businessmen or whatever. There's a creativity element to it, and
Yes.
people should think of if even if you're like not a professional creator, like it's kind of stuff I'm saying, like it's happening in your life all the time. It's if you just have to view it that way, and I don't know.
Well, I think viewing it through that lens, because I think that people do sometimes make a false dichotomy. Like we were even talking earlier about, well, if you wanted to get a job, you could just get a different job for income. And I think
Yeah,
that people refer to those typically as, day jobs. And people sometimes feel a lot of shame around them too. Like people who aren't making money out of their creative endeavors feel really ashamed of themselves for getting day jobs.
yeah.
Um,
I could see that. I don't I don't know what I would have done if music happened for me pretty quickly, but I mean I tried, actually. It's gonna sound funny, but I tried to not do music most of my life. I I thought I was gonna. I always did music growing up, and I was always had lots of opportunities doing it. But then I don't know what it is. I've thought about this recently. I tend to like avoid the things that I think are obvious, maybe, or easy. I'm
mm,
not sure why. I'm still thinking about it, but and I don't. That's not like a. I don't mean that as a badge of honor. I don't think it's a good thing to do that at all. I think sometimes the more obvious things right in front of you, you know, maybe you should do. And I don't know. I had this like idea that, well, I've got this kind of weird little gift in music, and I can just kind of do it easily. So that's too easy. I should be a doctor. Actually, my undergrad work was in pre-med. I was going to be a doctor.
oh, wow. So you actually were going to be
And
a doctor.
yeah, that's probably why I threw that out earlier. But I had thought that's what I was going to do. But at the same time, like I'm in college, everybody's coming to me asking me to produce their record. Um, because they knew I'd gone to Berkeley for like a year or so, and I had that background and everything. I was getting these incredible opportunities, even like actual bands that were signed. I was in college. I'm like, I don't have time to produce. I didn't even know what a producer was at that
That's so
point.
surreal.
Yeah, and I could not get away from it. Like when I graduated, it's like everybody I knew told me like, you need to go be a musician somewhere. Like you are an idiot if you don't do it. And I'm like, well, okay. And
All
I
right.
moved to Nashville, and it was like I moved to Nashville on a Monday, and like on Wednesday I got hired to like work on something with a record label. and that was it. I
Right.
didn't. So I don't know if to go back to the day job thing. Like I don't know what I would have done. I mean, if it had taken me a couple years to break in, I think I would have said, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know if I would have tried to pursue it. I always would have done music, I guess, but it
Mm.
was so personal. Like I just did it for me, and the fact that people pay me for it is like kind of crazy. Like that's great, but I feel like I would do it. I always used to, if you're the last person on earth, what would you do? Like that's always the way to tell, and
Right.
I know that I would always go sit at a piano and play it if I saw one
Right.
wandering a scorched earth as the last person alive.
Just be like, all right, where are those rogue pianos I used to have in the Instagram posts of pianos in public?
Yes, go find them. I go to the Steinway factory and it's fun. I always say piano. It's funny. I'm not even like that good a piano player. I know it's funny to say that as somebody who like is releasing a piano solo record, but I don't really separate like the writing of a song and like the instrument. It's kind of a
Mhm.
weird thing. Like I'm a guitar player by, I guess, I don't want to say trade, but I guess that's the
Mhm.
term. That's my background, is like as a guitar player. I actually was like a studio session
Mm.
player back in the day when they still had sessions. I don't really do that anymore, but um, it's funny that I ended up gravitating more towards piano for this stuff because I always tell people I don't feel like I'm a very good piano player. Like I can barely get by. I can just do the things that I hear in my head,
Mhm.
and I don't view it as like playing piano. I almost view it as like, well, I had to write this song somehow. I had to like get this thing out of my head, and the piano was there, so I did it.
So I did it.
It's kind of strange that I
It seems
would do
to
it on a
kind of
guitar. I don't know.
follow in theme with not taking the easy route.
It might. That's a great point. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. It would have been easier to just do guitar because it's like so easy, but no, I couldn't do that. And even with music nowadays, I'm like, well, no, I got to go get an MFA and write. And
Yep.
I, even within that, like I finished a couple of years ago, I finished my first novel. And then I thought, well, it'd be too easy to just publish my first novel. I got to go write 2 or 3 more novels. And I'm just realizing right now, like literally now, like in the last week almost, this is like that is so dumb. Like I have written like another like most of 2 other novels since that time. I'm like, why don't I just go back and edit the first one? And that's like what I should do. Like, why would I just not do that? It's the same thing as people telling me to just be a musician. Why are you be a doctor? You don't want to be a doctor. Go be a musician. Like, I don't know.
That's
It's
so
funny the
funny.
things you tell yourself. Like,
Yes. And
so
what we absorb from
I'm still
outside,
learning.
because your narrative is like, oh, by the way, that's an important point for everybody, is that we're always still learning. Like every day. I always joke that I'm like,
Oh
I was
God, yeah.
today years old when I figured out.
Well, it's unlearning, and I should make that important. Like the reason I can ask myself these questions now and do this stuff is because of the unlearning. Like
Mm.
you have to like I for so long I placed so much value on education. I mean, I do still, but on like how much do I know? I thought that was going to be that's the mountain to climb, and
Mhm.
then there's maybe a point in your life when you realize those are the things holding you back because all the stuff you think you know, you assume are true, all the things that are just immutably so, those are the things that are putting you into this rigid kind of paradigm that it's not enabling you to like really break out of it. And you have to,
Mm.
this is a great Zen proverb that says, to the expert, there are very few ways; to the beginner, there are many. Have a beginner's mind. And I, when I read that for the first time, I remembered uh, after I left Berkeley College of Music.
Mhm.
I only went there a year, but okay, so I grew up having like a pretty good understanding of music theory without knowing that I
Right,
did.
right.
Like I got music from a very early age. I just kind of understood it all. And then I went to Berkeley and they just taught me the names for all of it,
Yes.
of what I kind of knew. And but then when I left Berkeley, it was demystified 100%.
Mm.
And that's you said that word in our pre-interview talk,
Yes.
and it's exactly right. It's I'm giving you credit for it. It demystified music completely. Every song I heard, I knew the exact chords that were being played. I knew what was probably going to be played next. I knew everything about the melody and why they chose that melody and a different melody. And every time I tried to write music, I knew every option that was available to me. I could hear it in my head, and
Yep.
everything was just rigid, and I hated. I cannot tell you how much I hated it. Like it was a very dark time, and I was only like 19 or something.
Right.
And I I don't know why I had this idea at that age, but I did. I said, well, music used to be fun.
Mhm.
So how do I make it fun again? I need to not know what's going on. So I I took my guitar and I just put it into like a random alternate tuning.
Uh-huh.
And like for people who don't play instruments, like guitars, there are things such as alternate tunings that are kind of accepted, like and known as like an alternate tuning you can use. I don't mean that. I mean like literally truly random. Like I would just turn the tuners and the guitar would be relatively in tune with itself, but I had no idea what the
What was
actual
going on?
tuning was.
Yeah.
And I just started playing stuff, and I would change the tunings multiple times a day and just
Oh,
keep
wow.
playing. So I couldn't even guess what was going to happen when I hit the strings because I didn't know
Right.
what the tuning was.
Oh my god.
I couldn't predict anything. And I don't know, after some time, it finally like doing that, I learned to turn it off. It's definitely something you have to learn to, and you can learn to like you have a pretty deep theory knowledge and you can use it and employ it when you need to use it, but you can definitely learn to completely turn it off. And it's like, as I want to like, when I'm in this state of writing, I want to be as dumb as possible. Like I want to like not know anything. And I it wasn't until later in life I realized that I knew it back then. I
Mhm.
just didn't apply it like ever again. Like I didn't realize what I was doing. And because I went through this with fiction writing too. Like I got my MFA, so I know all about plotting and story structure and character arcs and you know all this kind of stuff. And then I realized like, holy shit, I'm doing it again.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
20 years later, and I've learned all this theory, and I've let it get in my way, and it made writing really not that fun anymore.
Right.
So now I have to learn to completely unlearn it all.
Well, and it's so
So yeah,
strange because it has to be almost not subliminal, that's the wrong word for it. But, like, you have to learn how to use the tools, then forget how to use the tools so you can use the tools.
yeah, and that's exactly what happens. Like it very much is that way. You have to just learn to. I break it down to now I can look at it and say there's like an initial act where you're creating something, and that should just be like let's just be like fire and chaos
Mhm.
is what that part should be. And then there's a part later where you can look at that and you can maybe look at some of that theory, but and employ it when you need to use it. Hopefully it's an off and on thing. You kind of turn it on and off, and because even in the editing process, it can be creative. You don't
Right.
have to always be that rigid guy. So yeah, it's about learning to go on and off. And it's funny how I did that so easily with music, but I just didn't do it at all with writing. Like I didn't even see that it was a problem. It's
It
funny.
sounds like it took you a minute to you had used the word immutable, previously, and I thought that that was
Hmm.
such an interesting choice of word because it's almost accepting that, like, if something has become immutable, that that's the problem right there, that actually things, like, are inherently mutable.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and
You think it
so
has to be a certain way.
yeah, and so it's like, if you do find yourself thinking, "Well, this has to be the way," it sounds like that's almost like I just tried to snap my fingers, but I have really small hands, so that made a dumb sound. I was like, "Oh, that sounds like I dropped the pin." That was the sound
I'll
of
do
my
it.
hand.
I'll do
There
it
you
for you.
go.
Let's snap. There it is. No,
Thank you.
you're absolutely right. One of my favorite quotes, my favorite quotes ever by anybody is from Alan Watts, and he said it's near the end of his life, and he said everything could have been anything else, and it would have just as much meaning. And I don't know. It's just incredible to me. He has this idea that he talks about where your choices don't really matter. It all always comes out like we spend so much time worrying about a certain choice, but you just have to. Again, part of why I did this new music thing was because if I was going to do these in one day, write these songs in one day, I
Hmm.
had to like really make choices fast.
Right.
And it was almost like testing that quote. I wanted to see like, okay, so I'm going to just go with the thing I write first, and that's what it's going to be. And I could have written 100 different things, but you know, the important thing is that you just make a choice. You know,
Hmm.
it doesn't probably matter the choice that you're struggling with. You know, the thing blocking your way to making the choice is that you're trying to make a choice. It's kind of a weird, paradox, but
Yes.
it's often the thing that we're like, for example, that phrase, the pursuit of happiness. One of my least favorite, phrases, because it's like saying the upness of down. It's not to pursue is to not be happy.
Right.
This the
Right.
definition. You cannot pursue happiness. It's literally the only, and even happiness in general. I think I said earlier that I don't like to frame things in terms of happy or not happy, because, or even good and bad, because if you try to frame an experience as happy or a feeling as happiness, then happiness can't exist in a vacuum. When you say something, when you say you have happiness, you're creating unhappiness by definition. There has to be
Right.
both sides, because we can only know happiness if there also is unhappiness.
Welcome to the
Um,
dialectic of why not both.
yeah, it's not to get too philosophical with it, but it's what you start to realize, like, you're on the wrong spectrum if you're trying to gauge things as happy, not happy, good,
Right.
bad. Because you'll never win that game. It's
No.
an unwinnable game. You have to get off that track, and just, it's more about acceptance, especially with creativity. I think it applies to life, but I'll try to keep this to creativity, and writing songs and writing books and stuff. It's it's about acceptance of the thing that it is,
Mhm.
and not judging it as good or bad or whatever.
Well,
But this
that
is a
sounds like
little tangent. Thank you for allowing that little tangent into Alan Watts' world.
I love pocket universes. This is great. It's
Yeah.
like
Well, that was all. What was that even based on? You said something that was really good that I was riffing on about. Well, I turned it into like your anything, or everything could be anything else, and it wouldn't
everything,
matter.
anything. Well, and that's what
Which
you
you said
did.
something before that was great.
I was just like, oh yes, I'm sure I did. I'm so articulate.
Hmm. Sorry,
And dunking
derailing
on
us.
myself. No, you're fine. Don't even fret.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how you wrote the current record that you're going to release is
Hmm.
basically you put exactly the philosophy you just expounded on into action doing that. And I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah. I really wanted to. When you do that, it makes it like I should be on NPR or something, because it's about like an experiment or something that I did, and I guess it kind of is. But the music, I don't view it as experimental in and of itself. I mean, I hope that they're actually listenable, like very good, songs that people can relax to, and it's not, like the deep uh, B sides of like Philip Glass or anything. It's not that inaccessible. It's not like John Cage. It's just they're pretty little piano songs, but the in and of itself, it was a bit of an experiment to see, like, okay,
Right.
well, does can I really do this? And I would say it's been a great experience for me personally. I just did a new record for Red, which comes out in April.
Oh, nice.
It's called Declaration, and it's one of my favorite records I've ever produced. And I know this is my sixth record with them, and to go that long with a band and still feel like you're doing stuff that's like fresh, let alone some of your favorite stuff you've ever done.
Right.
Um, it was an incredible experience, and I don't think I could not have done it without um, this other experience of having done, the piano songs of the
Mhm.
Solstice record.
Mhm.
I It really put me in that frame of mind of just kind of no thought, like the no mind of creating, and just like, because we had to do it, we had a very tight deadline,
Mm.
and it was like, I almost don't even believe, like, so I spent 2 years making the first record. I spent a year making the second record. We made this record in 6 weeks. We
Oh
wrote
my
it,
God.
recorded it, and mixed it in 6 weeks. And I have to give a lot of credit too to Anthony Armstrong, well, the whole band, Mike Barnes and Randy Armstrong and Dan, the drummer. But Anthony in particular, we wrote it all together, and he's the guitar player. And he,
Mm.
like, so I have this little, studio up in remote Maine, up in the mountains, and it's the other thing too. I can't make it sound like that bad that I work up here and not Nashville, because I think a lot of artists like to come up here because it is so remote, and
Yes.
work. And so Anthony came up and we went out to my studio in the mountains. They call it the Murder Cabin. It's not the official name of it. It just has become known as the Murder Cabin
You're
because
really
it's like
selling
this.
yourself here.
I know. Come work with me at the Murder Cabin.
Come work with me in the Murder
The
Cabin.
lighthouse keeper. Yeah.
I have a beard.
And we just spent so much of what I do with Red, with all the guys, like we just sit around and we talk about the idea of something, like not that they're not really concept records, but I mean, they kind of are a little bit, but but it's more about, we just talk about what's inspiring us, and we come up with an idea of like, what's the theme of this record? What's the idea of it? Like, what were we feeling? There's so much of that goes into like a full record.
Hmm.
And I was talking about all this stuff that I've just been going on about with you now, to Anthony, and we just had a lot of great connections about that. Uh, this idea of just like showing up and doing it, and Anthony's really good at uh, just letting it rip. I guess, like if I tell him to, I tell him, don't worry about like going too far, making
Uh-huh.
something too weird, and he's like, okay, Roger. And then because he knows like I'll be there to, as to like catch thing. He'll never go too
Mhm.
far. It's like
Mhm.
when we have each other for that. I do it too. Like he might check me on something if I'm going too far. But um, man, he just did such a great job with like, I mean, I don't know. He really found his style. Like, because I think when you work that fast, you can't really stop to think about it,
Right.
and that means like the real artist in you is coming out. And I just feel like the stuff he wrote on this record, like I was pretty blown away by it, and it inspired me, and I could see like, okay, this is like the real deal, what we're doing here. And it inspired me to like come up with the lyrics and all these
Mhm.
melodies and stuff like really fast. And it was just a very amazing like 6-week experience of
Wow.
seeing like everything I've been kind of talking about, work in a bigger scale, like with a full record, like this huge sounding, rock record. So
That's so
very
cool.
excited
I
for
was like,
people
it
to hear
sounds
that.
like go on.
I was going to say some of the themes even are some of the stuff I'm talking about. Like some of the themes of the songs are this idea of, you know, it's there's a lot of things in your head that you don't have to listen to. Um,
Hmm.
that in particular, there's one song called "The War We Made," and I can. This is the only song I can probably talk about because they're playing that live now on their tour, so it's out there. People know about it.
Gotcha.
The war we made, and it's just about. It's like one of the most important songs I feel like I've ever been a part of. It really just talks about this. We don't have to like have that fight in our head all the time. And when I was writing it, I actually thought about. Red has a different song that I'm a co-writer on called "The Fight Inside,"
Hmm.
and that came out a long time ago on an album called "Innocence and Instinct," maybe 2010 or something, 2009, maybe even eight. Actually, sorry, 2008.
Hmm.
And this song is all about the war inside, and like I'm getting torn apart by this constant like thing, and even in like the way we recorded it, it's almost sounds like there's two people arguing in this guy's head, and it's all that. And
Hmm.
this this song, "The War We Made," it's almost a response to that song.
And I like
It's
that you
almost
kind of had that callback to be like, oh, you actually don't have to do it that way.
it's exactly what it is. Like I'm telling that guy who wrote that, like, dude, buddy, you don't have to do that. You don't have to like fight that war. You made it. It's kind of interesting to be able to look back on things you wrote and then like almost write responses to them. I hadn't thought of it before this record, but I kind of realized like that's what I'm doing. I'm writing to my younger self and saying like, you don't have to do that, man.
Yeah, because I
It's
was going to
okay.
ask you like what you would tell your younger self or other younger selves who are out there, but it sounds like that record might
Oh my
even
God.
be kind of, oh, this might be
Yeah.
myself.
It's that, yeah, very, very much so. It's, well, see, I'm not big in defining what songs are about. Like that's a thing that, I mean, I will answer people if they ask me. But I really, most artists probably think this. I'm not unique because I think this, but art should be experienced directly by
Mhm.
the people and defined, every song is going to have a different meaning to somebody. And if I tell people what a song means, it, to go back to your word, it demystifies it a bit, and then it
Mhm.
becomes immutable, to be this. It becomes like a specific thing. It means this, and I really want it to meet people more where they are and mean something to them
Right.
personally. But a lot of these songs are, they're kind of about that. Often, like the singer is singing to that other voice in his head. When he talks about you,
Mhm.
he is kind of sort of telling the ego, it's like, nope, not today. It's not happening right now. Like I don't have to like march to your beat anymore. I don't have to do those things anymore. Uh, so if it's kind of a lot of the angles you wrote from, you probably wouldn't necessarily get that, if you just heard the song on the radio. I like to do music. I hope it's layered. I try to make it that way. I want it to be, if you heard it on the radio, you can just sing along to it and it's a cool song. But if you really want to analyze it, there's a lot more maybe
You can
there,
get into it.
so yeah, it's hard to always pull that off, but at least that's my goal. But,
I'm nodding sagely. I realize that made no
uh-huh.
sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like insert nod sagely.
Yep. I got it. I felt it.
There you go. There you go. What might you directly tell other people who are perhaps either younger or getting into the fields of music and writing? Because your narrative is so interesting that you were like, oh, I do want to become a doctor, and people are like, nah, become a musician. So many people actually have the opposite narrative that I was like, what would you tell those people that are experiencing perhaps the opposite narrative?
That's a great question. Well, no, I mean, it's a great question. Uh, it's a great hypothetical question that they would ask me, like, because I'm not sure what I would tell them. It's very hard for me to tell people what to do because I often don't know it myself. Like, I don't really know how I broke into industry. I don't know why people like hired me a lot. I didn't, things. Okay, so I'll try to actually answer this. I'll try to give some practical advice instead of just saying like, oh, I don't know what I do. I'm an artist, blah blah blah. I'll try to be like actually give some actionable things here.
I believe in you.
I'll try, and it plays into why not both. Um, when I was first starting out, I I had this like, okay, so a lot of people I got to know pretty quickly. They were either they just sort of just did one thing. Like I'd meet somebody, they were a songwriter.
Hmm.
Another dude, he's a session drummer or a session guitar player. Another guy's he's like a programmer. And so for like in music, for those that don't know, like when you say programmer, you mean a guy who kind of builds a track. They're probably good with keyboards and drums, and we call it programming the track, where they kind of just build these little. It's like all the cool like whiz bang sounds you hear in tracks are
Right.
often like programmers. And then you had like guys who were just trying to be producers, and uh, and I would see like these oftentimes like these guys be on top of the world and everything's going great. Then you'd see them like 2 weeks later and like, oh man, work's dried up. There's nothing going on. And so I had this kind of idea of I thought I could do a few things pretty well. Um, I thought, I was a pretty good guitar player, and I got back into, I really started practicing a bit more, making sure that I was really up to par. And then I realized I probably couldn't compete with all of the electric players that were out there.
Mm,
But there was kind of this new acoustic style that was coming to the forefront. This sort of like really percussive, aggressive acoustic style.
right.
This was in the early 2000s, and I could do that pretty naturally and well. So I decided to like make that like my thing, just like
Hmm.
I and also I was writing a ton of songs, and then I was producing. I mean, I was programming a ton of tracks. So I thought, okay, I can probably play guitar as well as, or at least competitively, with a lot of these guys who are only doing sessions. I can program right along with the guys who are programming. I
Hmm.
can write. I think I can write both lyrics and music. I can compete with these other, all these kind of ideas. So I thought, well, if I can do all of those things at the level of the best guys doing them, theoretically, work should never really dry up. I should be able to just always, like, one of those things should always be working.
Right.
And I don't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea. It in this case, it did work
Right.
exactly like it should have worked. Like I hoped it would. I got hired to do something. It was actually songs. I got uh, somebody liked a song I wrote, and it was the producer. It was a producer who was producing a record by an artist named Joy Williams, who went
Mhm.
on to be oh my god, what was that band? A huge band that she was in, the Civil Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's the girl in that band. But she was a solo artist before that. So I ended up getting kind of pulled into that project because of a song I'd written. And then he said, "Oh, you made this track, so you're a good programmer." And I'm like, "Oh, I can get by." And so, and then he realized like the guitar is on it too. So like he hired me for like everything on this record. I
Yes.
I wrote like 5 or 6 songs. I did all the programming. There were songs that he just basically used my demo, and then he put her vocal on top of it, and then I did all the guitars, and then that kind of thing happened a lot until the labels finally said like, well, why don't we just get this guy to produce it? Because he's
Right.
kind of the one doing all this stuff anyway. I'm not sure if so. Okay, that's a really specific approach, and this is the hard thing talking about. If you ask 100 musicians how they broke in, they're going to tell you 100 different
100 different
things.
things. Well, it
So
sounds
there's like, what can you distill down from it? I guess is the thing. So for me, the takeaway from that is not to specifically do those things. Like don't get prescriptive. Don't try to do that if you're trying to break in. Like don't try to become really good at 3 things or whatever I did.
right.
That's not the answer. The What you take away is I made myself invaluable pretty much
Mm.
to
Mhm.
whatever I was doing, and they
Mhm.
kind of realized I was the guy who could just do it.
Yep.
And I think the secret to doing that is, and not to go against the message of the podcast of why not both. I actually think it's one thing, uh, and it's once you realize like it's all just about one thing, which is getting something from the inside of you to the outside
Mhm.
somehow.
Mhm.
It's all one thing. Then that it kind of frees you up to do whatever you need to do to get there. You don't have to really think too much about all this other stuff like what should I become good at, what should I do. It just kind of happens when you have that like one goal, and there'll be a lot of different things probably that you'll end up doing. You might do a lot of different work in different mediums and be okay at them or great at them, but when you see that it's just really about one thing. So for me it was all about just making a really great piece of music, and it didn't matter how I did it. I sort of like, I remember this one time they asked me, it was actually on that record for
Mm.
Joy. I was doing guitar session, and the producer said, "Hey, next week I think this song could really use a bouzouki. Are you cool? So let's do that next week." And I just like, I didn't know what he even said. I said, but I said yes. I'm like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
cool, yeah, no
Uh-huh.
problem.
Totally.
And I'm like making notes, like I'm making notes on my music. I'm writing down the word, like kind of phonetically trying to spell what I think he just might have said. I didn't even know
Yes.
what he said. And I went home that night and I'm on the internet and I'm like trying to type in, what do you say? Bazooki? I didn't know what I wasn't that close. I'm saying it correctly. I was so far off. Eventually I realized what he meant. And it's kind of like a giant mandolin, basically. It's like the
Uh-huh.
same tuning as a mandolin.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I ordered one. I had it overnighted, learned how to play it, and then like went in like I'd done this 100 times to the session. Like, sure, let's do the bouzouki.
You're like, "Yeah, I got this
And
down."
it's like a thing that you just kind of like, I don't know. It's when you make yourself kind of like essential to like a project, and I don't know. That's probably the single thing in terms of how I specifically
Mhm.
did it. But it's I don't know. I think that they talk about how few people make it that try and all that stuff, but I just think that's really irrelevant. Like, don't worry about that. I would tell most people not to worry too much about, because they're meaningless statistics. I mean, sure, maybe it's true. One in, I don't know, 100, say one in, what do you think a good number is? 10,000, 100,000? I don't know.
Oh,
20 people
goodness.
break in.
I should be better at statistics given
But
how
if
many
we just
classes I've taken in it. And I think that I've just dumped it into the recess of my brain that is like, this is only important if someone asks you about a particular psychology study.
yes,
My brain's like, pardon me, this is not the right context.
yep. Well, there's a scientist thinking too much.
Yep.
If you say one in 10,000 people break into the industry or any industry like acting, whatever it is, like, okay, maybe that's true, but I would say that 9,500 of those people never had a chance, and they should just be removed from the sample that you're talking about. Like
Right.
I just don't see this like great abundance of people who I think are so incredibly talented and they should have made it and they just never did. In in music in particular, I don't see it. Like
Well, some of it goes
I
back to
don't
what
know.
you're talking about like letting things consume you. And it's almost like if you do let things consume you, I mean, definition of success might be flexible, but if you let something consume you and let yourself go down kind of an open path like you're describing of learning different skills and just getting the insides out in whatever way possible, then in some ways you will in fact succeed. You will be that one of 10,000 because you
Yeah,
will have gotten the insides out.
that's a great, well, and that actually touches on a great point I should have made. You just kind of made it for me. It's when you're driven and when you're that kind of person who's like the train's leaving, like you're going, it's with or without a record label, with or without any help from anyone else, whether you make it or like you don't even think in terms of making it or not making it. Like
Right.
you're gonna do it.
Gonna do the thing.
Period. Like this is gonna happen. That's what like people in industry are attracted to. They're attracted to motivation and drive, and just you can just clearly see someone's going to like do it or not. And most people are that's not the attitude they have. They think that they're going to like get a record deal and then say, okay, now the label's going to take care of everything, or I'm going to get a manager, and now my manager's going to
Mhm.
just tell me what to
Mhm.
do, and they're going to create an artist out of me. And so people want to work with somebody who's already an artist, who knows what they're doing already, who is
Right.
just, already the thing they're going to be. So it's that drive to just like, it's going to happen, I'm doing it with or without you. Like that's probably the single most like, important thing you could have done, I guess. It's a way better answer than the one I tried to give about. Yeah.
We got there. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, I think that in the end, that does make a really good point that it comes down to the drive and kind of putting into action the things that you're thinking about. You had mentioned kind of like being in your head about things and thinking about doing things, whereas the project that you just described, that every Saturday morning you sat down and you just did the thing. Like, I
Hmm.
think that that's the best advice of like, is it good? Is it bad? Don't care. Just do the
Yep.
thing.
Yeah. And exactly. I think that that story about how I really didn't like them much as I was doing them, and then later on came to realize they were some of the best things. Like, hopefully that's instructive to people. That's kind of what I mean about, people. I think that's why you need actual, like maybe working professionals talking about this stuff, is because maybe other people can sort of, who are trying to create or have some of these same problems, maybe they can just see that and go, okay, so, and this would be assuming this is a hypothetical person that actually liked the music I was doing. They might say, how could he have not liked that? Like, why? Like, in what universe did he think that wasn't good? And but then they realize, but it's true, it did
Mhm.
happen.
Mhm.
So that's happening to them as well. For everything they think is terrible, there's somebody else who would say, hey, that's really great, how do you not know that that's great? Like they so this is like, once you know that this happens to everybody, this is normal, this is not like,
Yep.
we people who create things that you love, they didn't probably know that how good it was when they made it. Like
Right.
they probably, they second guessed it, they probably almost didn't release it. And if you know that sometimes maybe that's normal, then you just go, oh, that's what that is, that's all that's happening to me. Maybe
Mhm.
my thing,
Mhm.
that's just a normal part of it. uh yeah, I
Just
don't
do
know,
it
it's,
anyway.
and you just have to like do it. It might be great, you just don't really know. It's, and a big part of it, like I had a thread recently about daring to be like bad, like not caring if it sucks completely. I think there's this, I have this theory, there's like a weird inverse relationship with the more you allow yourself to like write something that might be absolutely terrible, the better the good parts will be. Like,
Yes.
so maybe the bad parts will be actually really terrible. And that should be said too, because I'm talking about like, oh, this thing you think is bad, but maybe it is bad. I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's always there, but parts of it will be great too. And the more you allow yourself to be bad, the better the good parts are. I'm not sure why it's that true. And then you fix it later. You know, you take out
Right.
the bad stuff and you
Well, and
keep the
also
good
that, like,
stuff.
just because you made something bad doesn't make you bad. Like, I think
Yeah,
that that's sometimes what gets conflated for people is that, like, if you've created something that you feel like is a failure, that then you yourself are a failure, and it's like, no, that one thing didn't really go the way you wanted it to, but that
yeah,
doesn't invalidate all the other things that you're doing.
that's a great point. Yeah, I do this one thing bad, so everything I do must be bad. You know, and you
Right.
forget that no,
No.
I did some really good parts too. But that was bad. I'll give you that. That thing was bad, but you know, the good parts can be good. Yeah, people are too hard on themselves. That they're really without realizing it can like judge themselves extraordinarily like harshly. And
Quite so.
you really have to like let that go. You have to be okay. You have to laugh at it almost, just like revel in like, oh, this is terrible. It's so funny. Like, but then you'll read it back a month later and you'll see like, oh wow, that line is really good, insightful. I can't believe I wrote that. You know, I can't.
Yeah.
That'll happen too. So once you know other people, professionals uh, that have done stuff you probably love, like once you realize they went through that too, then
Right.
maybe it makes it easier. That's why I say like questions, like you know, that's why I want people to like see maybe that, like instead of asking questions about it, like see that process. I like to talk about it from that perspective, and maybe the Twitter threads I do, it's to kind of show like this is normal that you're
Yeah.
going through this, and once you know it's normal, you can go, oh, phew, okay, it's not just me. I'm not crazy. I'm not terrible.
Right.
It's you know,
Well, and knowing that it's like a universal experience, because otherwise you might think that other people either haven't doubted themselves or have had a different process of self doubt. But it's really nice when you look around at other humans around you and you're like, oh, you're all thinking the same. Okay, cool.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
all,
You feel I'm not alone. You're not
yeah,
alone in it. It's
yeah.
so that's like a big part of it
You're
for
not
people,
just
I
in the
think.
lighthouse.
Well, that still sounds nice to me. I got to be honest, but yeah,
Just pictured you building a studio in said lighthouse.
that'd be great. That's a great idea. On
There we
on
go.
an island, hopefully one of those like outer Hebrides islands or something, little lighthouse.
There you go. There you go. There's lots of wool sweaters involved in this vision. I'm already styling it for you.
Yep, lots of wool sweaters.
Thank you for coming on this adventure on Why Not Both that ends in a lighthouse on a remote island.
In the outer Hebrides. That's where it all ends.
That's it. There's nothing else to say there.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It has been.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss any episodes, especially these, special edition ones. This season, we're brought to you by Under the Radar. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print music and entertainment magazine as well as website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com and feel free to support them on Patreon. We are also produced by the brilliant Laura Studeris. If you want to come hang out with us on social media, we are at WNB the podcast, and that is both on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm excited to share more interviews with you.